Pranali Save is the CHRO of ICERTIS, a Pune-based unicorn company that provides contract management software to enterprise businesses. Pranali comes with a rich experience, having worked for 2 decades in the HR function in the Indian software industry. So in this Smartcast, we spoke to her about the future of work, how the HR function has evolved over the years, how organizations should build their company culture, and how things have changed in the distributed work environment. Pranali also spoke about the skills required to stay future relevant. We loved her insights and hope this chat helps shape how you think about future relevance the way it helped us. Hi Pranali, welcome to this CTQ Smartcast.
Hello and good morning.
We always talk a lot about future relevance. Choose to think is about upleveling for future relevance. So let's dive in straight into, just describing what this means. So from a CHRO's standpoint, what does the future of work really mean?
I think work has been evolving for several years now. The way we work, the nature of work, with who we work. It's just that pace, the acceleration has been super fast over the last few years, and that pace is going to increase even more as we go on. So, working in a multi-generational workforce, working together with bots, together with technology, that itself has changed the nature in a big way. Work as we knew it, when you went into place X called an office and you finished your work and came home, that doesn't happen anymore. Now, I don't know where work ends and if you call it life begins. The term work life balance itself is getting outdated. It's more about work life integration. And then how do you switch off in this always on world? So all of these changes that are coming in, how do you map with this change? How do you sort of ride that wave and make sure that you still deliver in an ever demanding market scenario? I think that's all about the future of work. And more, it's more about human behavior as opposed to anything else.
Right. Yeah. So, it's one of those things that nobody has trained for, nobody is prepared for. People are learning as they go. But the business leaders who are at the helm, how do they try to take advantage of, how the future of work is actually shaping up?
You need to get ahead of the curve. The change is going to come. It's That's the only thing that's certain. Nobody knows what will happen, when, how fast, etc. The only certainty is that it is going to change. So I think getting ahead of the curve, to me, for business leaders, I would say it's also about listening very keenly to the signals, listening to your employees, listening to what is being, what are the signals outside and what's being passed on within. So there's a lot of content out there. There are a lot of predictions being made, etc. So all of that is there. But I would say put your ear to the ground, listen, and a lot of these things are about what's the natural human reaction to things. So when you look at it from that angle, I think it's new for everybody, but it puts you in a place where you can, I think, respond better. And of course, business leaders can lean towards great HR professionals to guide them through this. So that's another way you can prep up as well.
Right. Yeah. So that leads me to the next question, Pranali. So what role should the HR function play in enabling this future of work?
As I said, the changes are, while there's a lot of technology dominating the changes itself, but how we adapt to this is also all about human behavior, how we manage the liquid workforce in the future, or the hybrid workforce in the future, all of these. And HR is, well, I'd say better placed than the other functions to be able to decode this, to be able to respond to these changes. So I think the role of HR as such is getting more critical, and it's becoming more of a business imperative, where earlier HR kind of stayed on the fringes. So HR needs to then step up about how do you coach leaders in an organization to deal with this change? How do you make the organization itself more resilient to change? And also, how do you help the workforce in general to keep themselves updated and, continuously learn, continuously upskill to stay relevant? I think if these three things are done, somehow it sounds easy, it's not at all. But these three levers, I think, is where HR needs to focus on.
Right, right. So, Pranali, can you give me some concrete examples of how people can actually do this, and how HR functions that you have been leading, how have you enabled this for employees in the workforce?
Let me take an example of the upskilling part, right? Staying relevant. So earlier on, it was like an organizational responsibility to make sure that everybody is upskilled and relevant. And, now it's moving towards enabling that to happen. It's about creating an awareness for the need for it to happen. It's about providing visibility as to the extent possible about what's coming up and what are the skills that will be needed, and it's then providing an environment. So we have moved to an real time, on demand, at your work. Well, I don't know whether to call it a workplace, but wherever, learn anywhere through any device. So that's the format. It's about the you decide what you want to learn, when you want to learn. There is just an environment provided. So lot of tie-ups that we have done to provide licenses to iCertians so they can decide what they want to pick up and when. That's one example where you help people. And you also, when I talk about awareness, it's also about building that sense of urgency, because to a lot of people it's a lot of everything's fine, theek chal raha hai, why change things? So it's also helping them understand that sense of urgency.
Right.
The second, I would say, is also building a sense of security with all the changes that are happening. There is that inherent trait, right, where we are all trying to latch on to something secure. So creating that sense of safety and security, I think, is also very important in this scenario. And we've been doing that at ICERTIS in what we call the four rings of responsibility, where it's a framework where we are telling employees that, hey, make your decisions with a certain amount of prioritization. So the first ring is essentially taking care of yourself. So we're saying that's the most important thing. And there's nothing selfish about doing that. It's the airlines example, classical, put your own oxygen mask first before you help others. So if you're not able to take care of yourself physically, mentally, as well as staying relevant in today's world, you can't be of any use to anybody else. The second ring goes on to say, take care of family, because that is what matters to us. You can't just switch it off and start thinking about work differently. So how do you do that? And there are a lot of initiatives we have started at ICERTIS which are aimed towards the family, because as work has moved to home, colleagues are also now, family members are in a way like pseudo colleagues. So you see them at your workplace because that's your home. You are invading into their space. The cafeteria, new cafeteria is your home kitchen, and so on and so forth, right? So how do you help people to take care of their family and to do it in a way that, hey, this is a priority and it's okay to do that? The third is taking care of community. We feel that we are in a position where we can make certain choices which are not available to some other brick and mortar companies, for example. And we are also with our business status, etc., able to help. So that's an encouragement we are making to all iCertians. How do we help the community? And then the fourth ring is actually taking care of business, the customers. And to a lot of people, they say, how can you put that last? But it's when you get the first three off the mind, and that's where that safety security net is there, then you can really focus, and it does work beautifully.
Right. Yeah, this is really insightful, Pranali. So any feedback from the employees? Like you said, a lot of people find it surprising. But was that something that people came back to you saying, oh, should the company be the last in the four rings? And how did they take it?
We got, in fact, a lot of positive feedback on the sequencing. And, I would say that maybe the apprehension was more in our minds when we put the four rings out there. But it resonated so well with people. They talk about it, they bring it up, they really appreciate it. And it's not just employees, but customers have gone out and said this, candidates have gone out and said this. So I think it really, it's a simple framework, and it gave people the freedom to, take care of their basic, Maslow's hierarchy, right? You first start your basic needs. And I think it ended up doing that. So we got a whole lot of positive feedback from the organization, and more so, it also became like a decision-making framework for us. That a lot of the when do we start working from office decisions, etc., which you struggle to find some rationale to do it. We put it in the four rings framework, and we said, okay, does it pass this test? And if it does, then this is the path we go. Or do we leave it to employees rather than some centralized person making calls? So it empowered people to think, it gave them a structure to think, and most important, it took them to that safe zone where it was okay to think like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Pranali, you're talking about, what is existing in the company and how you are building this. But in a fast growing company, there's always this influx of people coming in, right? And they will come with their own, thought processes. You may want to call it a baggage or whatever. But that does influence. Yes, the larger community is going to influence them more. It will be stronger, but there is going to be something. So how has your process of hiring talent changed over the last few years, keeping in mind the future of work, and also how you're building ICERTIS and with the the four rings of responsibility?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So talent, the war for talent has always been a big hot topic of discussion. Talent has been gone more global. I think with the pandemic, it is even more location agnostic than earlier. So there are interesting things, interesting dynamics happening in the talent market, even from availability perspective. I think new pockets of talent have become available. The gig economy, which again, from an India perspective, we've been kind of, some industries have taken to it, others have not. I think that is gaining, it's becoming a little more mainstream than earlier. A lot of people who could not otherwise, physically come to a workplace are able to do that today. So that's another pocket opening up. Compensation wise, certain metros, tier 2 cities have been high on the comp factor. There have been people who had to migrate to these locations to look for right opportunities, which also is going away. And in ICERTIS, we started this concept of ICERTIS everywhere. So you can work out of your home, native village, you can be at a farm, close to nature, wherever, and still have the same job you would otherwise have to relocate for. So those things, I think, have opened up the talent market. At the same time, it's also increased the competition in strange ways. So it's the change from a hiring standpoint is it's less about finding the talent. It's more about the ability to brand or sell what we have to offer. So, what does ICERTIS stand for? What is the flexibility we can offer to you? I think these are the questions that are coming up. So how effectively can we brand ourselves? And talent is smarter than earlier. They find you. You don't need to find them if you position and brand yourself correctly. And by branding, I'm not saying that you go out and just make false statements. It's about the experience that you give and how authentic that experience stays when the candidate becomes an employee. Another thing is people are no longer looking for jobs. They're looking for a purpose. So especially the millennials, etc. So are you able to offer them a purpose? I think that's the focus of talent acquisition. as opposed to just another job where, they come, spend a year or two, and then move on to something else. So how do you do that? How do you, create that purpose? How do you make them understand that purpose and, uh, effectively paint that entire picture is I think one big change. There are of course many more, but maybe this is where I'll stop.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of these have got accelerated over the last 1 year
Right.
as well, right? So over the last, 1 year, if you think of it, has that been a boon for, the perception of the HR function in organizations? And here I'm not asking you about only ICERTIS, but a more generalized view of, how HR is being viewed, and how leadership now looks at leveraging HR strengths as compared to, say, back in 2019 or before that. Has there been a market change?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, it's been a Carpe Diem movement for HR, is how I'd put it. HR has been, as I said, on the fringes, struggling always to prove relevance, and now it's a generic statement I'm making, not specific, as you said, to ICERTIS. So it's I think every wave of change brings its heroes. In the financial crisis, you had the CFOs taking center stage. The whole information security wave and digitization brought the CIOs to the forefront. I think this last year and the pandemic is all about HR taking that center stage. And interestingly, it's also where your years of you have to lean in on a lot of the basics, revisit the basics is how I'd put it, because as we move to the high tech, I think a part of the high touch was lost in the last few years, which has resurfaced with the pandemic and remote, and how do you re-engage with people, even if it's remote, how do you bring in the human element? And that's where HR has it's become business critical. I think companies have realized that everything is fine, but if they don't get this part of it fixed and the workforce engaged and motivated, it's not going to help anything. So definitely 2020 has been the year for HR and of HR.
So Pranali, like you mentioned about the airlines, about taking care of yourself first, similarly for, say, an HR professional, especially someone young who's just starting off with a career in HR, what do you advise them to do to make sure they are, staying future relevant?
So I think this is a great time for young HR professionals. Earlier there was always the apprehension that for a young HR professional that, hey, now I'm getting into the field, there are so many veterans, so much of experience. But in that sense, the pandemic has been a great leveler. And, of course, there's maturity, there's a background that comes with it, but it's essentially brought people on the same footing. And in fact, I would say younger professionals tend to have an advantage because you're more digitally native, or at least familiar, and in a better position to use technology to your benefit. So that's my one advice, that get friendly with technology. There are lot of advancements that have happened in that space, and you can leverage them and use them to your advantage. The second, which is contradictory to the first, is I'd say get even more human than earlier. It's all about getting that human connect back. And there is a tendency with younger, not HR only, but in general younger professionals, that the knowledge resides on the net. Yes, it does, but there's a lot more knowledge in the real world. So talk to people, listen to people, experiment. That's what my urge would be. We have enough of thought leaders out there, everybody's reading about those, but there is a wealth of information when you talk to your employees, your peers, your colleagues. And my advice would be to leverage that and use that collective wisdom to then experiment, maybe fail fast, and find the right way forward.
Right. Yeah. So that actually, brings me to the next question that I had, and I'm going to change that slightly now that you've mentioned it. So my question was about the role of, tools and digital systems, and what should HR folks do to, actually start getting comfortable working with algorithms and tools rather than get replaced by them. And I'll add a sub part to it. What should the older folks do? Because you said, the younger folks are more comfortable with these tools. So what should the older folks do about changing their attitude towards these tools as well?
The answer lies in your question. It's the attitude.
Okay.
So I think HR professionals, a lot. There's this whole paradigm about HR being not able to deal with numbers or with technology, and I think it's also a self-created monster. So it's how you approach that, and become friends with technology as opposed to fearing it. I think the debate of does technology replace is still, I would say, it's passé. You kind of use it to your advantage. Okay, I mean, maybe there are people who say AI will take over the world. I think human intellect will still ride above that, and even above that, I think human emotion will ride even above that as well. So I would say, stop being afraid of it. Stop being afraid that it's going to take over. Stop being afraid that how do I even understand this, and start practicing it. With simple examples I can give, through the pandemic, we've seen, you know, senior citizens using apps for purchases, groceries and things like that. My parents, who always, the phone was just about receiving and making calls, the mobile phone. I see my dad doing so much more, and he's 80 plus. So if he can do it, and if so many of people from that generation can do it, I think it's a no-brainer that it's about the attitude and not so much about the skilling part of it.
Right.
And one more I'd say is it's maybe some of us get stuck with using technology just to get data, but how do you get those insights from that data? I think that is where the focus should be. So that's when you work as a partner as opposed to an either or kind of a relationship.
Right. And where have you seen these tools being used, very well over the last, 2-3 years?
Uh, Definitely in the talent acquisition space. Again, there are places where I think it's worked brilliantly in terms of in volume hiring, narrowing down, some of the weeding out the mass, and bringing it down to a focus group where you can actually engage in an in-person dialogue more effectively. That's been one space. The other I'd say is also, again, more of last year, is the whole usage of the video JDs and video interviewing techniques. We've been able to reach out to pockets where that talent was not able to come to a certain place for an in-person. So that's again been a place where technology has been useful, and plus I'd say it also needs somebody to look at it from an HR angle, because then you need to think about how do you make the candidate comfortable with that technology, how do you make sure that the space where the person is currently located does not form a part of you're taking away the biases that would otherwise come in. So that's been one area I think there's been significant movement. The well-being space, engagement space, again, so much of usage of technology to reach out and get a feel. In office, it's easy, right? You take a walk down the floor, or you just have lunch in the cafeteria with a couple of colleagues, and you get a good feel of the pulse, which you don't now. So leveraging technology towards that, I think, again, many changes and apps coming into play there.
Right.
there are examples from all fields. Learning is another space. I would say so much now. It's Technology is an integral part of that as well.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. Another thing that you touched upon about the multi-generational aspect of workforce. In fact, it won't be too much of an exaggeration if you think of, say, a 52-year-old senior director. Her, son or daughter is probably joining the same organization after engineering, right? That's a distinct possibility now. So how do, in your experience, how have you been seeing people deal with this? If not their own child, probably their child's best friend is joining the same organization.
Absolutely.
How are you seeing this pan out in the Indian tech industry space?
There's several examples, and what you mentioned, I've actually seen it happen, in places I've worked. And you said, senior director. Now, it's also a bit different sometimes when the, the person entering the workforce, is not a trainee anymore, but, comes with a lot of background where, and in startups particularly, where it could be that that person is actually closer to that director title. So
Right.
experience and positioning in the workspace itself has changed so much that even from a multi-generational, I think one element is the way of thinking, how people respond to different scenarios, but the other is also the whole it's challenged the whole mentality of you need to have X years of experience to reach a particular position. And that is not very easy for people to follow, but I've seen brilliant examples of senior senior people, very happily reporting to, and I don't mean just from a hierarchy perspective, but reporting to, learning from, getting mentored by younger entrants into the workforce. So that, I think, it's beginning to change. It will take time. Maybe IT industries and startups in particular are a little more ahead of the curve than others.
Correct.
But it's a brilliant change that's happening, and I think it helps also to smooth out how you look at your own families back home when you see that experience. So I mean, I see the younger generation at work contributing so well, so much better than I did when I was that old. I look at my kids now with even more respect than I did earlier.
That's a good one, Pranali. So let's move to the next section, and here we wanted to talk about culture of organizations and the values that they follow. We know for a fact, because we've also worked on the Forte values at ICERTIS, the fairness, openness, respect, teamwork, and
Right.
execution are integral to the ICERTIS DNA, right? We know for a fact, but we wanted you to give some concrete examples of how Forte really governs, the culture, decision making at ICERTIS.
Yeah, and CTQ has been partnering us on this journey, so you've been witness to what we've been doing. Examples I'll take. Well, Forte is it's truly embedded in everything that we do. So it's not a standalone PowerPoint or a plaque on the wall. So every time we are making a hiring decision, it starts from there. It's one part of the decision making is, does the person fit into the Forte values. So there is a bit of assessment from a behavioral standpoint that happens, and unless we are convinced about this, we have said no to candidates who are otherwise brilliant. Similarly, decisions on promotions, decisions on internal mobility decisions, all of these also go through a Forte lens. Rewards is another obvious one. Our bonuses are linked to Forte apart from other business metrics, and those that linkage is taken very, very seriously. It's not just a it's not something that's put there so people earn that part of the bonus, but they need to really make an effort. Recently, we launched a recognition framework. We call it the VIA framework. VIA is for values in action. So, even there, when we went through a huge discussion around, what should we call it, because it should reflect the real purpose, and we settled on the values there again, interestingly. So there also there is a very, very strong connect with Forte, even in some of the awards which are directly linked to business results. But the basic hygiene factor in making the cut for any selection there is all about, do you pass the Forte test? We also run once in a year, because this topic is such a subjective thing, you can't really quantify. So how do you then calibrate the organization on, what does fairness mean in ICERTIS, or what is openness in ICERTIS? So every year, roughly about 100, 150 of the senior leadership is brought physically. It's a huge expense and investment, but they are physically brought to one location. And this year, unfortunately, we had to do it virtually, um, where we bring out actual Forte cases. So they are real life use cases, of course, anonymized to protect identities, etc. But these are brought up, these are, the case is placed on the table, and the leaders are invited to share their interpretation. How would they respond to it? Which of the Forte values would they resonate with? And there are very, very different perspectives that come up. It's one of the exercises that is really valued, and there's so much of learning, so much of common calibration that comes out of it, that then when those leaders go in parts of the organization and they are expected to replicate this with their teams, that's where we cascade it. And that makes it easy then, for the decision making process also, because everybody is then speaking the same language with respect to food.
Right, right. Yeah. So, I can clearly see a lot of effort going into the propagation of the values. But we often see organizations either, do lip service to these value statements, or sometimes they even fail to identify the values of their culture. So why do you think that happens? Is it because of, inability to assess and propagate, or the effort that it takes? What could be the reason why this does not happen in more organizations?
Well, I think the topic itself is it's a subjective one, right? I think a lot of places or a lot of leaders, they shy away from it because, as you rightly said, the assessment is difficult, or how do you calibrate it, or how do you explain it to the people becomes a challenge. So maybe that's where, instead of jumping head on, people maybe take a back seat. So even where they are identified, and I'd say most organizations today do articulate their values, but they do become lip service, because it's the test is really when there are tough decisions to make. So, and our CEO Samir Bodas, he often says that, is it that we are following our values because we can afford it, we can afford to, and would we continue to do that even if we can't afford to? That's the real test. So even when in places where that your choice of customers, for example, are you willing to let your values drive that? Are you willing to say no to something? I think these are the questions that business leaders should upfront ask themselves before making that commitment, because once you do, there's no going back. Then if you slip, then that's when, for everything that you've done, but all that remains is lip service.
Right.
And we've had those kind of testing decisions where we've had excellent performers on the team, a lot of business riding on them, but they didn't make the Forte cut, and we've had to make tough calls. Or the other way around, where we said that okay, we would still continue to invest in this individual.
Right.
So I think it's all about that. And the challenge is, it's not like it becomes lip service also if you do it once and then you don't talk about it often enough. So in ICERTIS, every presentation that we have, for larger audience, larger meaning even a small team meeting is larger, anything more than 2 or 3 people, is starts with looking at the slides on the vision, mission, and the values.
Right.
So we keep it is like so much of hyper communication around it that people now sort of, even if the slide didn't appear, you kind of mentally start seeing it on the screen. When you have this technical glitches, sometimes there's nothing on the screen, but I can still see the Forte slide there because it's ingrained here.
Correct.
So you need to keep reinforcing it also to make it come alive. And maybe that's another thing that makes a difference between whether it's lip service or it's really followed.
Right. Yeah. And we've also noticed a slightly different problem at a different end of the spectrum, where we've met, say, co-founders of young companies who really understand the importance of building a culture, identifying, the DNA of the organization. But two things, like sort of hold them back. One is they feel it's going to be a very effortful exercise just to identify these things. And that leads to the second challenge where they feel that, okay, this is something really important. I need to give it time. So let me do it, at the end of this month, next quarter, when things are slightly, more comfortable. And as you know, that never, the next month, next quarter never comes, right? They have the right intentions, but they don't do that. So is there a middle path of, sort of, chugging along on this path so that you get it right sometime? Or is it advisable to stop everything, get this right once and then move forward? What's your recommendation to these kind of people?
I'm a bit of a Puritan when it comes to the values. I don't think you can, be do it in parts or pieces, or you can be, well, I'm, on trust. I'm 90% on trust. You can't have that, right? It's 0 or it's 100. So I think this is not something where you can say that let me make my first million and then I will follow the values. It's you need to commit to it day one. You have to jump off the cliff, and of course, it's evolving as well. Day one, when you make the commitment, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to reach out to all employees, whether you're a small startup of 30 people or you have 30,000 people in your company. That might take time. How you percolate it down the line might take time, and there it's okay to set your expectations, spread them across a bit. But you need to, the initial commitment needs to happen, and you can't take shortcuts then. So, and it's like in life, right? I mean, if you're hungry and you have no money, do you steal that food and eat it, or do you still, try to earn something through some format and then buy it? It's always a choice. So that's why they are called values, right? So I would just say that once you make that choice, the returns that come are worth it, because now skills are sort of out there for anyone to get. Similarly, information is out there for everybody to get. So the differentiators, list of differentiators is really shrinking. So it's about attitude, it's about values, it's about culture and choices. So I would say even bigger organizations have a different challenge in how do you keep that belongingness and the connectedness. But with smaller setups, especially, and we get a lot of feedback from candidates that in 2 interviews that they go to, maybe they see the consistency in the interview process where people do talk about the values and they find that attractive enough to come and join. So that would be my invitation to especially the younger organizations that are looking to start up, who might think the timing is wrong. It's not. It's actually the right time to do this.
Right. Yeah. I'll move to the next section, which is around distributed work, but we'll come back to this topic here. In the last 1 year and with the whole distributed work, suddenly a lot of levers that you would have otherwise had in terms of influencing culture like, say, people seeing others in action, like you said, or the physical space, the headquarters. Suddenly all of that just disappeared, right, in the last 1 year. So with respect to influencing people's mindset and culture, what are the levers of influence that you still have, and how have you used them?
Yeah. So one has been, coaching the managers to stay connected with their teams. How do they do that? How do they assess performance differently? How do they find opportunities to reward people and recognize people? Ensuring some basic frameworks in keeping an informal connect. So one part of it has been that. The other, which has been, I think, a little more tricky for us, has been from a cultural standpoint. How do you get, especially people who've never been inside of an ICERTIS office, never, shaken hands with a colleague, and it's all been remote. How do they experience a slice of ICERTIS culture, values, and leaders? So there, and you are aware, CTQ has been partnering us in this. So we've done a series of initiatives there. One I can call out has been iConnect, which has been, creating a set of stories. It's a storyboard around experiencing the ICERTIS culture. So Forte stories, we spoke about Forte. So how are the values of ICERTIS? What are the legends around those? How have people leveraged those? So these are stories that have been contributed by iCERTians. They are about iCERTIS people or experiences, and these are shared. And it's a live storyboard where people can, go read up, contribute their own, recognize colleagues, etc. That's been one of the things. The other has also been an attempt to recreate the spontaneity of the office. So, with remote, what happens is that you become a slave of your calendar. Your meetings are structured, your agenda is structured. So the next 30 minutes you will be speaking to Harish and somebody else, and this is the agenda, and that's it. Whereas when you meet physically, as you walk to that meeting room, you might bump into another colleague, you have a different conversation, someone from a different team. So recreating those moments of serendipity, recreating those random conversations which all connect in the end, and creating those that diverse network within the organization. That has been something we've been trying by trying to replicate this randomness even in the remote world. And it's not been easy, we're still struggling, but that's one of the levers that's helped us to stay connected. It's bumped up our ENPS scores, and I think it's allowed people to still feel a part of ICERTIS even while they are working remote, and in many instances not even in the same city.
Right, right. I remember Pranali. Pranali, I think we spoke back in June for the first time, and you were already sort of preparing for what life will be, 2-3 quarters down the line, especially when things go hybrid. You were one of the first few people that we spoke who was already looking towards the future. So, in the light of what you just mentioned about people talking and really thinking about their own, say, mental wellness, this monotony that has crept in, for in spite of all the efforts, how have people been dealing with it? How has people, has it been a case of, yeah, now we've accepted this, people want to go back to the older days, people want the hybrid model as the next thing, they want to take the best of both worlds? What is your sense of how people want to do it, and what is your sense of how businesses want to do it?
That's a tough question. There's it's also what the business wants and what people want. It's also so much a factor of when you ask them. Because in June, the scenario was very different from how it was in, let's say, November, December timeframe. And, just when people recalibrated, felt that, okay, this monotony is getting too much and we want to get back to work, along comes wave two. There's again panic in the air, and again you sort of take. So it's one step forward, two steps behind, sometimes the other way around. So I think it's hybrid is the word really. It's flexible and hybrid. That's all one can do. So you need to ensure that you provide flexibility, and that's where our forings of responsibility again comes into play, because everybody's personal situation may also be different. So we are thinking about this the hybrid model where we have 10% of folks who would always be working inside of an ICERTIS office, because they want to, because their roles are such. We would have roughly 30 to 40% who would always be working totally remote, because that's again the using the liquid workforce there, the gig economy there, all of that. And then there's the floating population in between who wants the flexibility to come in a few days, not come in, some other days. So again, we're looking at redefining work more about, being in office for collaboration, sometimes for extremely focused work where you want to be in a zone which is allowing you to concentrate, but otherwise you work from anywhere and in any format. So that's how I see us moving forward. And at any point of time, I think that whole 10, 40, and 50 sort of mix might change in whichever way, and that's the whole dynamism of how this pandemic is playing out. And even I think post vaccination, etc., even when the pandemic fear is not there, it's a matter of choice. People have gotten used to the choice.
Right.
So it will continue to be that.
Right.
That
And
said, a lot of other things also we did in terms of trying to make things lighter for the people while they were from home. We had this wellness hampers, we've had fun events, we've had family involvement. So it's been also cluttered with a lot of these other initiatives.
right. Yeah. And how have you managed yourself over the last 1 year, and what has your new routine been like?
That's so I joined ICERTIS right before the pandemic hit, and I had my agenda all charted out. This is what we would do, etc. And then comes the pandemic, and suddenly my to-do list is not my own. Newer priorities just fell there, and it was interesting. So for me personally, I think I've thoroughly enjoyed 2020. I think in for me, that silver lining has been much bigger than that, than the cloud itself. Because particularly in my role, and that applies to a lot of people, we all work on a global platform today. I think it allowed me the opportunity to have equal access to every insertion, irrespective of where in the globe they were, without having that pressure or that feeling that, hey, am I spending more time with the people in the office I go to? Am I traveling enough? So it took away a lot of those other things, and allowed me that opportunity to connect equally with everybody. The second is it gave me a lot of flexibility as a person to put my own schedule there, figure out my own cadence in what were the times I was maybe more active at office, what was the time I took out for some personal space. It's been a journey. I think we all went through that journey, and how we brought in a lot of discipline into our time schedule, so on, so forth. But it's to me, I think, when I look back, I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I think it's been much better than a normal average year would have been.
Nice. Yeah. One more thing that you briefly touched upon, and I want you to unpack that a bit. The last 1 year of, say, the distributed work mode, how has that affected the whole idea of diversity and inclusion in organizations?
So interesting. And There are two parts to it. One has been, from a positive note, I think it brought in a lot of equal opportunity to folks. So, as I mentioned earlier, it didn't matter where you were working from. You could choose to be in any location and have an equal access to the kind of role you wanted to play, the kind of place you wanted to be in. That was one. A lot of people, especially women who were otherwise finding it difficult to hold a full-time job, where they had to step in at, whatever, 9 in the morning, the typical 40-hour week and 9 to 5 jobs, they got that flexibility and could take up different types of employment while being at home. So, from a DI perspective, that was a blessing to a lot of people. At the same time, I think it also brought some hidden challenges in. So, I think redefining, for women particularly, maybe for some of them, it was easier when they went into the office space, and for that time, they had a different role.
Right.
Now, when they are in the same home setup, and with especially with joint family systems, etc., there's a conflict in who focuses on what share of the household, elderly care, child care, etc. And that's also put, I think, different pressures on different segments of the population. And that is something which is, I think, we need to kind of be cognizant about and empathetic about, and take that into account while we, assess performance, or reach out to people, or set work times, etc. So that is one piece which I would say is slightly, I put it in the gray zone a bit. And the other fresh element, which I think we will see when we start getting back in larger numbers to the office in a hybrid model, is this new set of haves and have-nots, right? So there's a new power dynamics, I think, that's waiting to be played out in terms of, does physical access to the office environment, the, maybe better technology, better faster technology, or even to the bosses, does that give you a different edge? Or, how do you keep that equality with those who are then working outside of the office and may not have the same access? How do you include people into a meeting where in a conference room you have 8 people inside and 4 outside? How do you ensure they have an equal opportunity to speak up? So there is this whole set of new dynamics from a inclusion perspective, I think, that's popping up. And it's going to be a space we need to tread very, very carefully, is how I see it.
Right, right. Yeah. What you mentioned on the D&I is also, sort of addresses my next question about how do you manage remote workers. But I wanted to ask you, is there a distinction that you make between managing the gig workers? Because they're, after all, they are at a slightly, they are at an arm's length as compared to the rest of the organization, because they've come in for a certain project, certain task. So how do you then, ensure that they're being treated? Should they be treated? Will they be treated as the regular workforce? And is there something different in how do you manage them?
So it's still a learning curve. We don't have as big a proportion of gig workers as we would want to have. So time before we get there. But my own personal take on it is, whether you're engaging with the organization for 2 days a week, 4 hours a day, or you're in it 24/7. For the time that you are engaging with ICERTIS, I want that person to have 100% of the ICERTIS experience and not feel any different, because that commitment for that moment is still 100%, right? So in that sense, I wouldn't want to make too many distinctions from an experience perspective. There are, of course, other elements of the legalities and how the employment policies are built around it, etc. I think those need to be addressed separately. But from an experience perspective, I think I expect 100% irrespective of the terms of engagement, and I would want to also give 100% of the experience in the same manner.
Right. Right. And in these times, do you think some skills have become more important that people should focus on, learning?
Very much. Resilience is topping everybody's charts, of course, and I put it out there upfront as well. Agility, again, big time, very, very important. I would call out empathy. I would call out also self-discipline, maybe, because it's self-drive, self-discipline. The focus is now on how you run, you organize yourself and manage yourself, as opposed to expecting a supervisor or a manager to do it for you. And in the same breath, I would say that coaching skills for people leaders is becoming very, very um, relevant and important now, with the entire managing and supervision kind of getting outdated.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. All right. So let's move to the last section where we will give you some words, topics, and
Okay.
we would want your hot take on the future relevance of these things. And I must admit, I've been like sort of on the back foot here, because you have sort of addressed a lot of the things that we wanted to ask you. But I'm still going to ask you these things for the simple reason that I want you to think of the future relevance, say in a couple of decades for these, and then think if your answers change. So first thing that I want to ask you about is the future relevance of HR as a function.
Critical,
Sorry?
business critical is
Business
how
critical.
business critical is how I'd put it.
Okay.
People are will become more and more the differentiators in future, and any function that helps to leverage that element is going to be business critical. So I think HR is here to stay, and I'd also say that I also feel, you said over several decades. So I think the next evolution is also about HR not being specialized to a couple of people in that function, but HR is going to be a part and parcel of every people leader. So I think that function will be, it's like coaching skills, right? You don't have a coaching department. You may have an expert coach, but you don't have a coaching department. Everybody needs to have it. I think HR is going to be that, where it's going to go to every people leader as a hygiene factor, and then you would have a few experts and who would ensure that everything stays on track.
Okay. Next one is company headquarters.
No mothership anymore. I think it's going to be satellite offices all the way. And well, I think headquarters now is more like having a virtual background like I have. So everybody has the same virtual background, and I could be sitting in a park, I could be at home, or I could be in one of the satellite offices. But it's convenience, it's reducing commute times, and it's also accessibility is now so easy that you don't need that physical huge statement out there of a nice big office with shiny windows and all of that. I think it's all going to go away.
Okay. The next one is coaching. What is the future relevance of coaching?
Again, a big one. It's getting more and more important. It's going to be part of the basic skill set for any manager. Wouldn't even want to use the term manager, any leader at all levels. So very, very, very highly valued as we go ahead. It's a form of learning as well as a form of giving, is how I put it.
Okay. And the final one, organization design in general.
Okay, that's a tricky one. I don't have the answer to that. I'll just say that future is about how maybe that structure is not, it's going to change even more dynamically than it did before. So it's about how do you build an agile structure, how do you leverage cross-functional networks, and moving away from the old will definitely go out. But what is the new, I don't know, except for the fact that it would be constantly changing and constantly readjusting itself. I also feel that apart from sort of one common structure, we might have different avatars within the same organization. Need-based sets of mini organizations coming together, working in a cross-functional fashion, and then dispersing after that.
All right. On that note, Pranali, let me admit that this interview was actually an exercise in agility for me, because you kept wrong-footing me by answering questions that I would have planned later. So I had to be super agile, in this interview. So it was a great experience, chatting with you, picking your brains on how things are going to change over the next few years. So thanks a lot, Pranali.
Thanks, Harish. And maybe I've been sort of threading in many different spots. So if I've upset your question schedule, apologies for that. But I enjoyed it, and thank you so much.